Hey, I'm Bethany Dawson and welcome to My Classic Soul, the podcast dedicated to the best in soul and R&B music throughout the decades. In our latest episode, soulmusic.com founder David Nathan catches up with a special guest, multi-talented, award-winning Marcus Miller, a recent 2020 inductee into the Soul Music Hall of Fame in the categories producer/arranger and musician/instrumentalist, to talk about his illustrious career working with icons like Luther Vandross, Aretha Franklin and Miles Davis, among a more than impressive list of credits that is literally pages long, as well as his own work as a solo recording artist and composer.
Well, sometimes when we do the podcast that we do for My Classic Soul, I have like this big introduction that I do, you know, and I could do a big introduction for our guest for today, because we've known each other a long time. So I'm going to cut the introduction short so we can talk more. So I'm just going to say it is a real honor, privilege, pleasure to welcome award-winning producer, songwriter, musician, and recent inductee into the Soul Music Hall of Fame, Marcus Miller.
David Nathan, how are you doing, man? It's great to see you again, man.
You too. As I referenced in the introduction there, which is one of the briefest ones I've ever done, I think. We go back, and I was trying to, in preparation for our podcast, I was trying to think, well, when did I first meet you? And I couldn't actually identify it specifically. So how we can probably piece it together is talking about your beginnings of your own career, particularly in regard as a producer and songwriter, and also, of course, as a stellar musician. Session musician and tour musician, and then, of course, recording artist in your own right. But I can't actually pin the actual moment when I met you. Do you have any idea when that might be?
My guess is early 80s. And I know I first started writing music for Lonnie Liston Smith, right?
Okay.
And that was actually late 70s, 77. 78, and I also wrote some stuff for Bobby Humphrey.
Yeah.
That was like during the first wave of that kind of contemporary jazz thing. I mean, I don't know what the things are anymore. I don't know what they call it anymore. But I'm talking about Roy Ayers, Norman Connors, Grover Washington Jr., those kind of folks.
Absolutely.
And then after that, I got into studio work, and I was, because I could play the bass. Like I'm from around the way, but I could read music really well because I was classically trained on the clarinet. So I started doing sessions for everybody. I was just walking up and down Broadway, just different dates. And then, who else was doing that was Luther Vandross. He was a session singer. So he sang background on everybody's record. If you needed great backgrounds for your record, disco records or soul records, whatever it was, you call Luther and he would call the correct singers. He'd put together a background group for you and he'd suggest parts for your music. So Luther was doing that. I was doing my bass thing, and we were crossing paths a lot. And eventually, we became buddies. Luther recommended me to Roberta Flack.
Yes.
He was, when he wasn't doing sessions, he was doing concerts, singing back for Roberta.
I remember that. Yeah.
I ended up joining the band. And we became really good friends then. And eventually, he said, I want to do a demo. I said, what, you want to be an artist? He said, yeah. I said, you're the number 1 background singer in New York. You're doing so well. You're singing on all the commercials, for Ford trucks and Miller Beer and everything. And you're doing so well. Why do you want to go through the hassle of being an artist? He said, I got a vision, an idea in my head about what I want to do on my own. So we ended up doing a demo. Buddy Williams, who was also the drummer in Roberta Flack's band, he played on the demo. Myself, Nat Adderley Jr., who was Luther's childhood friend, piano player.
Yes.
And the nephew of Cannonball Adderley, the great jazz musician. He was on the demo. Steve Love, guitarist, was on the demo. And that demo ended up being Luther Vandross's first record, Never Too Much. And so I'm thinking, David, it's a long answer to your question. I think that when the Luther stuff came out is probably when, we began to talk, because I know you're a great fan of Luther Vandross's. And so it was probably, and that record came out, I think, 81. So
that's correct. That's correct. Yeah. So, well, I do have a little anecdote to throw in there, Marcus, and I'm not sure this will make you smile. I think in the time period just prior to Luther doing that album, the first album for Epic, he and I were neighbors. We lived in buildings next door to each other on West 56th Street.
I knew that. Yes.
I
mean, I forgot, but yes. Yes. I knew that you guys were.
I was in 320, and I think he was in 330. Mine was a modest, small building. His was one of those like 8, 10 story, whatever. And and we met. We had done an interview when he had a group, like a group called Luther, that recorded for Cotillion Records, and which was, of course, part of Atlantic. And then we ran into each other in the street, and he said, "Well, what are you doing?" Like, not rude, but like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I live in that building." He said, "Well, I live in that building." So we were like, "Oh, we're neighbors," and that was really the beginning of us having a friendship. And of course, we had already done the interview. But the thing I was going to cut straight to is that he. I remember when he was on the road with Roberta and doing all the jingles and so on, and he had made a demo. And and he gave me a cassette. This is the days of cassette, okay, Marcus? I think you remember those days, right?
Well, yeah.
And the cassette had I think 3 or 4 songs. The one I remember most vividly, and I don't know if you were on this, was on this demo. Was "You Stop Loving Me"?
You stop loving.
There you go. We've got a nice little rendition here. Thank you, Marcus. Were you on that? Were you on that demo?
Yeah, and that was the hit of the demo. We all thought.
Yeah. And here's what happened. I said to Luther, he was having, actually, to be honest, and he would have said the same thing. He was having a hard time getting a record deal as a solo artist.
Yeah.
And I was going to London. And he said, "Well, David, I was going to visit London and my family and everyone." And he said, "Could you take the cassette with you to see if anyone was interested?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely." So there I went with the little cassette with "You Stop Loving Me" on it. I think it had, for some reason, it had "Bad Boy" on it. It has something else on there that I don't think it had "Never Too Much" on it. I can't remember what. There were 4 songs. But anyway, "You Stop Loving Me" was the one that I remember too. Yeah. So I played it to a couple of record company people in London, and I thought, well, somebody's going to say, "Yeah, this is great." And I remember having a meeting with an A&R guy, and he said, "Well, it's really good. It sounds really great." And I told him some of his credits. He said, "But it's just too American."
Too American.
So I had to come back to New York and tell Luther, "I'm sorry, I could, I tried, but
that's one of the most precious stories of perseverance that I know, that I've personally experienced, because we did that demo on a Sunday morning at Media Sound, which was right down the block from where you used to live.
57th Street. Yeah.
And from the time we did the demo, Luther took that thing around as you did. He took that thing around to every record company for at least a year.
Absolutely.
And, the reaction was always, "It sounds good." I think they, the A&R guys at the record companies were looking for a gimmick, because at that time, David, you remember, R&B was about Earth, Wind and Fire, Lakeside, Cameo.
Absolutely.
About groups with 16 dudes in them with every color in the spectrum on their outfits. You know what I mean? And Luther didn't really have a gimmick like that. His gimmick was that he could really sing, That's
right.
But that had fallen out of favor for a second at that particular point in R&B history. So thanks to Larkin Arnold, you remember that name?
That's right. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Larkin was at Epic Records, which is part of Sony. And Larkin said, "Okay, I'll sign you." And although, David, the A&R guys and the record companies weren't sure, when that record hit the radio,
oh, I remember.
the public was damn sure that this was like...
I remember so well. I do. Well, I have one more moment associated with that, and then we want to move on to talking about all the many things that you did subsequent to that. And that was, I remember the day he came over when he had finished recording A House Is Not a Home. Mm. And he called me and said, can you come over? I want to play you something. And I went over to his apartment because, again, it was the next building, and he put it on. And, of course, I knew the song from Dionne Warwick, and I knew a lot about the song, actually. I knew its history and so on. And when he put it on, that expression, we didn't have that expression back then, Mark. It was like, shake. We didn't have SMH, or shake my head.
Yeah, sure.
But I just shook my head. I didn't have. He said, "You don't like it?" Because I couldn't find any words. It's funny now. In remembering the moment, I can't find the word. Yeah. I just looked. I was like,
yeah,
I was like that. Yeah. So I knew that something had happened. Something massively major and wonderful had happened, and so that was the beginning of that journey. Sure. And did you immediately go on the road with him?
Yeah. Once he got signed, the record came out, and Never Too Much was on the radio all day long, every day, during the daytime. And then at night, House Is Not a Home.
Yeah.
Radio all night long. So it was just an instant success. So I remember one of the first gigs we had was at a theater called the Savoy in Manhattan. It's no longer there, but it was like in the Times Square area. Yes. And we opened up for Shaka Khan. And man, I think the record had maybe been out for a month, and people were singing every word. It was just incredible. I missed the first set. It was 2 sets, 2 shows. Yes. We had a sound check, and I lived in Queens at the time, near JFK Airport. And after sound check, which was in the afternoon, I figured I'm going to go home and get my cool-looking bass and get into my clothes. And on the F train, apparently a building collapsed on the route of the F train, and the train just stopped in the tunnel for hours. And I'm sitting there going, man, this is crazy. So when the train finally pulled into the next station, hours later, I just jumped on the train going the other direction to get back to the gig. And when I got to the gig, they were playing the last song, David, of the first set.
Oh, man.
Luckily, Anthony Jackson, you familiar with him?
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Luckily, Anthony Jackson happened to be in the audience. So when they were about to hit, Nat Adderley, he looks and sees Anthony and says, Anthony, get your ass up here. And Anthony, who is an incredible reader, just read the set. He just read the first set. And I showed up in the last song and waiting for Luther as he's coming off the stage with my head down, because I'm like his little brother, you know what I mean? So I know catch hell, but he just said, you shouldn't have left. You shouldn't have went home. I said, yeah, I know. And man, let me tell you, I played my ass off that second.
I'm wondering, actually, just as a point of, you mentioned the Savoy, and I'm wondering if that was also you mentioned Rufus and Shaka Khan. I wonder if that is actually the time when they did the live at the. It had a live album called Live at the Savoy, which included Ain't Nobody was not on the live part of it, right. But it was a live album. Do you think that was it?
I don't know, because David, this gig, no, I'm sure it wasn't, because this was a Shaka Khan gig. This was
solo Shaka Khan. Oh, I got you.
Cloud and Naughty and that kind of stuff. So
I got you.
It was a different period,
So let me ask you. I was looking through your very lengthy discography. I mean, there's literally pages and pages. I'm like, wow. And I was thinking, well, how can I condense this into, asking you about main things? So I narrowed it down to a few specific questions, specific points. So one of the things, one of the primary questions I have for you, Marcus, is what was your first gig or first opportunity as a producer?
My first opportunity as a producer was Lonnie Liston Smith. I had, you know, as a teenager, I had written some music for him, Space Princess, a couple of things that were pretty successful for Lonnie. And then, you know, I moved on and I was working with Luther and working with different people. And then Lonnie called me and said, listen, I would like for you to produce my next album. And I was like, oh, that'd be fantastic, because, you know, I'd been arranging, I'd been writing, but I hadn't actually ever been at the helm.
Yes.
And Lonnie gave me that opportunity, and we had a song called Never Too Late, and we had a song called A Lonely Way to Be.
Yes.
That did very well, but that was my first one. And then I think the next one was a live recording by David Sanborn. I had been playing in David's band in the 80s from like 79 through 84. And in 84, they decided they wanted to do a live album. And I'd been touring, and David had been basically playing, he'd been playing the same set for 4 years on the road. You know what I mean? It was, he didn't add any songs. So by the time it was time to do the live album, we knew the songs like the back of our hand. Yeah. And David's manager said, rather than hire an outside producer, Marcus, why don't you just produce it? So that was my second one. And then David and I began to start producing. I started producing records for David on a regular basis. And Luther, he said, listen, we're writing all these songs together. I need you to help me take some of the load off. So Luther and I began to co-produce his albums.
Yes. So let's go backwards a little bit. So in sequence, so then really songwriting precedes producing.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to ask you a tricky question, Marcus, and I'm sure you know the answer. What was the first song you recorded? The first song you wrote that was recorded?
It's called Sunset Burgundy by Bobby Humphrey.
Oh, you remember? Wow.
You remember the first one always, you know? And
yes.
Bobby Humphrey was produced at that time by Ralph McDonald, who's very prolific songwriter himself and a percussionist.
Percussionist, of course, yeah.
And I was in Bobby Humphrey's band, and I played my little cassette for Bobby. And she said, I like this song. I'm going to ask Ralph if we can include it in our album. And she must have fought for me, because Ralph said, okay, we'll let the kid play. I was 17. I came in the studio. They were playing, you know, they were recording the whole album. It was Steve Gadd, Eric Gale, Richard T., Anthony Jackson, and Ralph. So this is like the A-team of New York.
Yeah.
Musicians. They'd all played with King Curtis and Aretha Franklin and Harry Belafonte. They were just the top. And Ralph says, Anthony, get up. This kid's going to play this one song. I'm like, oh, man, Anthony Jackson. Get up and sit in the room on the couch while I play this one song. But to make a long story short, I wrote another song for Bobby that we recorded in the same way. And Ralph asked me at that time, hey, man, can you read music? And I said, yeah, I can read music. He said, don't bullshit me. Can you read? Because I'm about to start suggesting you for some of these jingles and for some of these sessions. I said, man, I play classical clarinet. I can read any bass part that you write. You know, I said, if a fly had a poop on toilet paper, I'll read that. You know what I mean? He said, all right. And he true to his word, man, he recommended me for a couple of sessions, and within a month I was working all day, all night in the New York studios. So, but it was all from that song. It was all from that
one song. Yes. But and as your songwriting career, as your career developed overall, would you say that songwriting became more prominent? When would you say songwriting became even more prominent as part of your I was going to say your repertoire, but not really repertoire. As part of your array of talents. There you go.
Well, I'll tell you, I grew up in an area called Jamaica, Queens.
Yes,
New York. And like I said earlier, it's near JFK Airport. And I just was part of a musician community that was just incredible. I'm talking about guys like Donald Blackman, Bernard Wright, Tom Brown, Denzel Miller, Ronnie Miller. It's just a bunch of great musicians, and we were a little community. You know, we called ourselves the Cats. And Denzel Miller, who's a great keyboard player, he played with Shaka Khan, George Duke, Stanley Clarke. Denzel, who was like a mentor, he said, listen, you're not a complete musician unless you're writing music as well. Now, that's not necessarily true, But I'm 16 years old, and this is what Denzel's telling me. So I took him at his word. So I started writing really early, and like I said, the first song that I got recorded was Bobby Humphrey, but I had a bunch of them. I had cassettes. Matter of fact, I was writing some songs. I gave David Sanborn a cassette of my songs when I was playing with him early on, and he called me back. Hey man, I want to do these songs. I said, which one? He said, all of them. You know what I mean? So songwriting was always really an integral part for me. You know what I mean? And I think you know how it works, David. If you're a songwriter and a musician, your songwriting or an arranger also, they all feed off of each other. So as a bass player, I was always trying to play something that was really appropriate for the arrangement. I never tried to overplay, unless it was necessary for the arrangement. But you know what I mean? As an arranger, you're always listening to the whole sound. So I was always trying to play appropriate stuff.
And of course, at some point, I know you began recording as a solo artist. And am I correct that your first solo ventures as a recording artist were with Warner Brothers?
Yeah, with Warner Brothers. I want to say like 82, 83. I did two albums for Warner Brothers. One was called Suddenly and one was called Marcus Miller. And at that time, I was heavy into studio work. By this time, I had been playing in the studios for 3 or 4 years. And, I think when I listen to that record, I can hear that, you know what I mean? Because there's two different talents, being a studio musician where you can fit into every different situation. Because I was playing for Elton John, and then I was playing for Carly Simon, and then I was playing for Grover Washington Jr., you know what I mean? Then I was playing for McDonald's in a jingle, you know what I mean? John O'Fagan. It was crazy. So I could switch really easily. Yes. But as an artist, that's not what you need to do. As an artist, you have to have a really specific focus point of view. So I don't really think I had that. I was hanging with Luther, so I was singing songs and the bass was just supporting. After a couple of albums, I said, you know what? Let me step back and see if I can get a little bit clearer idea of who I am. And then I picked up later on.
Yeah. And being signed to Warner Brothers, was that like a natural place for you to go, or was it as a result of David Sanborn's, your association with David Sanborn, I'm guessing, was probably the way that happened?
Yeah, David Sanborn, and when we were playing with David Sanborn on gigs, we were opening for Al Jarreau, who was also and this is when Al was a huge pop star. Yeah, you know what I mean, so I was getting to know all the guys at Warner Brothers just from being associated with David and Al Jarreau. Tommy Puma was the guy that signed me over there.
Yes, and I know this is a different. I was looking again. I was looking at your list of credits. I was like, I don't even know where this would be, like a 5-hour podcast. But since we don't have 5 hours, I'm going to ask you about a couple of particular artists that you work with, that and just your thoughts about how that was. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind for me, while not exactly in the soul category, so to speak, is a legend, of course, Miles Davis. So how was it for you working with Miles Davis? Were you like completely intimidated, or you were just like, okay, all right, another gig?
Yeah, well, it helps to be young. I'll tell you that. You know what I mean? Because you're not really aware of how heavy it is when you're 21. Yes. But it wasn't like I was completely unaware. I knew this was Miles Davis, and he was already a legend. 1981, he had been on the scene since the 40s, you know what I mean? So he had 40 years of an incredible history. Wow. My father and my uncles had all of his records, so I knew it was a big deal, but it wasn't so bad. It was intimidating when I walked in the studio the first time and saw Miles Davis, because what do you say? You know what I mean? How do you have conversation with Miles Davis? That was a little tricky at first, but once we started playing music, he gave us a hard time, like for the first couple of takes. You know what I mean? He would criticize us and tell us to do one thing. And then when we did that, he said, that's not what I want. I want the other thing. But once we got into a groove, I forgot about being nervous, because, music will do that. Music will make you, especially if you want to be true to the music, you have to kind of leave your insecurities, leave them at the door and do your thing. So once the music started, I was cool.
Let's pause there for a quick break. Then we'll return with David Nathan and special guest Marcus Miller, recounting just a few of his many career highlights that include 2 decades of collaborating with Luther Vandross, his first session with Aretha, and producing Miles Davis.
Out now on Soul Music Records in association with Platinum Garage Recordings, Preston Glass presents Love and Compassion, Volume 3, the 3rd volume of the successful Preston Glass Presents Love and Compassion digital album series, continuing the positive messages of the previous 2 volumes. It includes guest artists Larry Graham, Chubby Tavares, Debbie Sledge, Robin S., and The Temptations' Ron Tyson. Preston Glass Presents Love and Compassion, Volume 3 is out now on all digital platforms.
All you teach is time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say.
All right. So let's go about a couple of other legends. So Aretha. And sessions with Aretha.
Okay.
I didn't even have to say the last name, obviously.
No. If you need her last name, then you just need to just sit down somewhere and do some studying. But Aretha Martin, you remember Aretha Martin, the great producer?
Absolutely.
Legendary producer. And
Yes,
I had been making a name for myself in the New York studios. And Aretha called me and said, listen, I'm going to LA to record Aretha Franklin. And there's nobody quite right for the record in LA, so I want to fly you out to LA. And I said, okay. So I went out, and it was Jeff Porcaro and David Page and Steve Lukather, you know, so it was the Toto guys.
Toto, yeah.
And Greg Fillingames was on the set too, and myself. And so Aretha was there. This was in the days when, you know, the singer actually sang along with the band.
Yeah.
Recording. And it was just, I mean, that felt like you were in the presence of royalty also, you know. And can I tell you one quick story about Aretha?
Of course you can. Yeah.
About that session?
Yeah.
We were there for about a week cutting tracks for Aretha. And we were at the end of a day, and everybody's packing up their instruments. And the drummer, Jeff, was gone, and everybody else was gone except me. I'm still putting my bass away in my little wires and stuff. And Aretha Martin must have asked Aretha to go and overdub an extra line. So while I'm packing my bass, Aretha comes into the session, into the studio, to the microphone, which is right there in front of me. And she puts on the headphones, and she starts singing, you know, these lines for Aretha. And I'm sitting there, and I'm hearing the Queen of Soul, and she's literally 4 feet away from me. And you know how when you're recording in the studio with headphones, other people can't hear the music. So all I was hearing was her voice. And it was flipping me out, man. I couldn't believe that I was in her presence, and I'm hearing her voice this clearly. So I'm just slowly packing my bass, you know what I mean? And really slowed down. It was one of the most incredible moments of my life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
3 days later, we're at the end of the day, and Aretha says, Marcus, I want you to add a secondary bass line to this song. I said, okay. So everybody else was gone. I ran and got my bass and sat down in my chair and got ready to add this bass line that Aretha had requested, right? And right before they turn on the tape to play the music, Aretha comes out of the side door, pulls up a chair, and puts it 3 feet in front of me and goes like this. And man, I was so nervous playing with her. She never said a word. Eventually she left, but she taught me such a huge lesson. You know, what she was saying to me was, I'm sure you consider me the queen or whatever, but you still need to realize I'm a human being, and you need to realize what it feels like to have somebody sitting in your grill like this while you're trying to perform, right?
Yes, yes.
And again, she never said a word, but she taught me such a great lesson. I have to remember that these superstars are still human beings.
Human beings, absolutely. So, I mean, again, we could go through everything you've ever done. It would be 5 hours, and we're not going to do that. But I do have to, and I'm really kind of, I'm kind of thinking, well, I mean, I had a list of questions, and we've gone over some of them. So, but I do need to ask you, if you look back at all you've done up to this point, is there one particular, I mean, highlight's the right word, but I mean, you've mentioned a couple of amazing experiences, but is there one thing that you can say that was the moment when you just felt like, wow, like you had really reached a certain point of I don't know what you call it, a success, but more like this is a highlight that you'll never ever forget?
You know, it's kind of hard, David, because I was playing with Miles and Luther, and we were recording with Aretha all at the same time.
Wow.
You know, I mean, I was literally running from studio. I ran out of a session for Luther and jumped on a plane from New York to Boston and got to the hall just as Miles and those guys were walking on stage. You know, it was nuts. And David Sanborn also, there was so much going on for me in the 80s. It was kind of a whirlwind, you know what I mean? And like I said, I was 21, 22, 23. So it just seemed like the most natural thing to do until I look back on it later on. I do remember a couple of things. I remember when I gave Luther a tape of a track because he wanted to write something for Aretha Franklin. And I gave him a track, you know, like just the music. And he said, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm going to write a melody and some lyrics to this for Aretha. And the next day he's calling me up. He said, man, I just wrote the first verse of this song for Aretha. It's going to be incredible, Marcus. Order that Porsche you always wanted. Right? I'm like, wait, what? He said, you're going to make so much money. This song is going to be a smash. You know, Luther was like that. He was very,
I know. Yeah.
I mean, so half hour later, he'd say, I just finished the chorus. Make it a blue Porsche. You know, so he kept calling me after he would write parts of the song. He would call me and add features to this Porsche that he suggested. Again, it was incredible. And it was so much fun because when we worked together, it was just he was so funny, you know, and the song ended up being a big hit. It was called Jump to It.
It's called Jump to It, like I just kind of like, yeah, jump. Man.
Yeah, it was Jump to It, and it was a hit. I ended up buying a Porsche. You know what I mean? I didn't buy a blue one, but I felt obligated because this was going to happen. But, you know, that's a musical thing because it's incredible to hear Aretha singing something that you had a hand in to add to that incredible history. Same thing with Miles. You know, these guys have an incredible history. And if you could just add a couple of sentences to that history, that's a pretty awesome thing. You know what I mean? So I remember that. I remember working with Luther because he was just an incredible artist and we had so much fun. I don't know how we got the records done. You know what I mean? But I hear him back and he was truly a great artist. Miles, I ended up writing music and producing for Miles. Sure. So that was pretty awesome. And ended up, you know, although I was intimidated by him when I joined his band, after a couple of years, I started writing and producing and we became really tight, man. And I heard stories, man, about bebop, about the 40s, about the 50s. I mean, and the thing was, he would start talking right before we were going to record because we were just adding and jumping to tracks that I had already done. So it's just he and I, you know, he's sitting here at the mic and I'm just sitting here telling him when to come in, when to stop, that kind of stuff. And right before a take, he go, man, Charlie Parker. And then he just tell me this long story about Charlie Parker. And we would let him go as long as he wanted to talk because it was just gold, man. And I just feel really fortunate to have had those times with him.
Well, you have certainly worked with some absolute legends. And, you know, really the thing that is real great for me, Marcus, is that at the same time, you know, you are recognized for your own talent, for what you've created for yourself, and who you are in the music industry, in the realm of music. You know, not just one particular genre of music, which is why, you know, having you inducted into the Soul Music Hall of Fame. As again, I always tell people, remind people, this is by popular vote. This isn't like the music industry sitting, nothing wrong with that. This isn't like the music industry sitting somewhere deciding so-and-so is great. But this is actually what we do online, you know, through soulmusic.com. We actually have people vote. And so it's really it's a testament to your, to not just to your abilities in the studio, on the road, and everywhere. Well, there you go, in full display, the Soul Music Hall of Fame induction. And the only category you haven't yet, but thank you for showing that. Yes, please make sure that you post on social media. You know, the only category that I didn't see that we've yet you've yet been inducted is songwriter. And the fact is, you just mentioned some of those songs, and I think we need to make sure people know that yes, incredible solo artist, producer, musician extraordinary, and written a couple of songs here and there. And I just have to end by sharing one thing with you. With somebody we talk about, jump to it, and I do have like a minute Luther story, and I don't usually talk in a minute. I'll see if I can do this. So when I got to know Luther, you know, at that time period that we're talking about, one of the traditions that he started, because I didn't drive, was he would call me and say, "I want you to hear my new record before it comes out." And it would literally, we drive around Manhattan, because at that time we both lived in Manhattan. And I remember vividly when he played Jump to It to me for the first time. And I mean, we were in his, I don't know if it was a car, Jeep, I don't know what it was. He was driving, but I said, we also gone around like this whole part of Manhattan about 10 times. I said, play again. Because I knew that he was about to give Aretha, you know, her biggest hit for a while. And it just was so amazing. And really, you know, to know that the genesis of that song began with you with a cassette is pretty phenomenal, man. Pretty phenomenal.
You know, she hadn't had a hit for a while. You know, it was
I know. Yeah.
Maybe since the 70s. So it was a big deal.
Yes.
To kind of bring her back. And then she went on for a whole second part of her career.
That's right.
Freeway Love and all that stuff. But we were very, very proud. It was, I mean, she was Luther's idol, you know what I mean? Yeah. So to be part of it and to help him contribute to his idol and to be involved was just incredible. Well,
to complete our wonderful podcast, Marcus, you know, I think we might have to do a part 2 at some point. What is this? Is it something that you have not yet accomplished that you want to accomplish?
You know, now for me, I'm looking like outside, you know, what can I do with my music that can affect the world? You know, for instance, I did a Get Out the Vote virtual concert where I arranged it, and I had Patti LaBelle and Shaka Khan, BB Winans, Take 6, Layla Hathaway, a whole bunch of great artists. And I called them and said, look, you know, we got to make sure everybody participates in this American presidential vote that's coming up. Let's do a virtual concert to inspire people to go out and vote. And we were very, very successful. You know what I mean? So I got to use music to kind of help make things better, at least.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You certainly did. Yeah.
I realized that music was that powerful. I wrote a song called Tutu for Miles Davis.
Yeah.
It was in celebration of Bishop Desmond Tutu, who was fighting alongside Nelson Mandela against apartheid. And when I finally visited South Africa after the end of apartheid, people let me know how much that song had inspired them and gave them support, strength. And when I realized that, you know, that was the beginning of me realizing music can be really powerful and it can be used for some incredible things. So since then, I've been looking towards that to see what I can help achieve.
Wow. Well, Marcus, it's really, really great to speak with you. Again, start where I'll end where I began, which is a privilege, honor.
Man, it's almost 40 years, David Nathan.
I know, man. See, I wasn't 17 when you met me. So, hey.
But you've written some great stuff, man, and particularly from my man Luther Vandross. You know what I mean? You really kind of got into the inside of the music, and really we always appreciated what you were writing about him. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, and thank you for being part of my classic soul today. And you want to hold up the induction one more time for the introduction? Yay! Yeah. All right, Marcus. All right, everyone can see. We should take a snapshot. Oh well. Anyway, all right. Thank you so much, and yeah, I look forward to at some point doing another podcast with you.
Sounds good, man. Looking forward to it.
All right. Take care of yourself. Thank you.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David and Marcus. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform, and visit us for breaking news and daily updates about your favourite soul and R&B artists over at soulmusic.com. I'm Bethany Dawson. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on My Classic Soul.